All right. I'm going to start recording even though we're not really ready. So, like always, we're going to start. I'm going to start now with hello over there. Okay. I'm going to start. I'm going to start with the demo for setting up for rendering. Sophia, it'll show up like over here, like where instead of it saying recent right here, it'll be like recover from previous installation or something like that. All right. So, oh, I need to update. What was I saying? Yes, we're gonna set it up for like rendering. If we want to render an image, okay. If like maybe we're making a poster of our teacup and our shoebox and our orange of the slice, right? For whatever reason, this is gonna be the basis of a poster. We'll add text to it later or whatever. Well, we need to set up lighting. We need a camera. We need a background. Maybe that would be helpful. Something to cast shadows onto if that's what we want to do. If we want it to look three-dimensional, you can always do flat rendering as well. So make it sort of look like a vector in some ways. There's lots of different rendering types. Right? Rendering just means making it draw or making it do the calculations, the physics calculations, to process how light bounces off the objects. All right, this is a little world. All right, this is epistemology. We're creating little universes inside of Blender. All right, I don't need the. So here's my teacup. I didn't fix the handle at all, but that's okay for now. I am, just for clarity, I'm gonna move my origin down to the center instead of having it way up there. You don't have to do this. Like with all the demos in here, it's probably best if you just watch and listen instead of trying to follow along with what you're doing, because odds are you're going to miss something, you're going to get lost, you're going to break it, you're going to write a Python script that's going to make it crash. You know, something's going to happen, Fletcher. Something's going to happen. That's all right. I like the ambition. Okay. So I've got that guy there. There's my orange on that layer and my shoebox on this layer. Now right now, I have no, if I look at my objects here, I have no camera. There's nothing to actually look at what I've done to try to render it and make an image out of it. In our properties tabs over here, where we've got all these different tabs for different settings of various objects and things, the render is helpfully the camera tab. All right, so try to remember that. It's generally the first drop-down menu at the very top. Render just does a still image. Animation does a sequence of frames. Okay. Audio, if you've got audio in Blender for some reason, it'll just render out the audio. Where do you want it to display? By default, it goes to the image editor. So if you have a window up, that is your UV or image editor. That's the little picture icon there. If you've got that up, that's where your render is going to show. As it's figuring out the calculations, that's where it's going to go. You can change that to be whatever window you want. To make it open up in an entirely new window, which is sometimes helpful. If you have a dual monitor display, you can just put your render window up over there and still keep working on your file or whatever, etc. I usually just leave it at default. Feature set, don't really mess with this unless you know what you're doing, and at this point, just don't mess with it. Experimental is fine, but it can cause crashes, lots of crashes. Supported is the way to go for now. You can pretty much safely ignore open shading language, whether or not it's on or off. The one thing I would maybe check is under Preferences, System. On the left-hand side, it'll ask about Compute Device. Where is it doing the rendering? On the Mac Pros, you can have it do the rendering on the GPU. On my dinky little 13-inch MacBook Pro, definitely cannot make it render on the GPU. I have to use the CPU, the main processor. So if you're on something that has a GPU that's a little beefy, like Josh's Razer will probably let you do it. Does it have CUDA on there? Yeah, see. So he can render it on his GPU. GPU rendering is generally faster, which is why. If you don't see that, are you on the system tab all the way over, Susie? Do you see the compute device? What does it say? there you go. So if you click on OpenCL, if you're on the Mac Pro, it should show you the 2 graphics cards that are in these Mac Pros. Okay, and that way it'll render a little faster. It's not going to be like tremendously faster, but it'll be a little bit faster. Like OpenCL for me, oh, it will let me render on my Iris, but it's actually a lot slower than just rendering on my CPU. So on the Mac Pros, just switch over to OpenCL. If you have a Windows machine and you have an NVIDIA chipset, so you have an NVIDIA graphics card, it should say something like CUDA or NVIDIA or something over here. And if you click on it, it should then... Does it still say OpenCL for you? Or what does it say, Josh? It says CUDA? Yeah, okay. So it'll say CUDA over here. Click on that, and then it should tell you, it should recognize your graphics card. All right? This is generally why when you're doing 3D modeling, you tend to use like a beefy workstation, you know, like a desktop with dedicated graphics cards in it for this kind of work. Generally, anything that can run a video game really, really well can do 3D modeling, rendering really, really well. It's usually a one-to-one. All right. That would be the one thing I would change before we go any further. Okay. Other things that are important to know. We have dimension presets. So there's some rendering presets. They're all for like screens. So generally your dimensions are going to be screen based. If you are printing for like a poster or a printout, it's good to know your size, whatever your poster is going to be, like 11 by 17 or whatever. What I do is a rule of thumb. So say I want to do like the image we're going to make is an 11 by 17 portrait. Okay. I just take 11 and times it by 300. So 3300 to get my pixel dimensions. Right. So 3300 by whatever 17 times 300 is. 5100. That'll get you your dimensions correct and a good DPI. Okay. All right. This for your render tells you, okay, are we rendering it? What size or what percentage of the render are we doing? Unless you're doing a final render, there's no reason to do 100%. Or you have a beast of a machine and it'll render really quickly. Because rendering can take forever sometimes, right? If you're doing animations, especially, like I'm talking like days to render something. An average Pixar movie takes like 2 to 3 years to render. Just they render it in little chunks. And it takes them that long to render and then edit it all together. So just keep that in mind. That's why it's usually about, well, until they got really big and they had multiple teams working on different movies at a time. It'd be like one team working on one movie at a time, and it'd be like 5 or 6 years between Pixar movies. Right? Okay, so generally anywhere, like I usually do like 50% or 30, depends on pixel dimensions. You can see what my final resolution is going to be like down here. That's still a pretty good size image. This is if you're doing animations, frame rates. Default is 24. I usually like to switch that to 30. We're not doing any animation right now, so it doesn't matter. Rest you can ignore. Output, this is important. Where is it saving it? By default, it's going to save it into a temporary folder. All right, it's temp folder. If you open that up, click on that, it'll show you all the junk that you have in your temp folder. I have a lot, like I have a Wi-Fi log. That's a good thing to have in there. Got some Blender files. Oh, okay. Some backups, some other junk. If you don't want it to save there, which I don't want it to save there, tell it to save somewhere else. So like Dropbox, classes, blends. I usually make a dedicated render file. So a file called render, and then just leave that. You just need the folder. Okay. All right. So it should have that file path. Overwrite things, give an extension. I turn off overwrite. That's just me. I like to save the copies just in case. And then what sort of format do you want to save in? You've got lots of different formats. If you're just doing an image, you're safe sticking with the PNG, JPEG area. TIFF if you want to make like a big, TIFF or OpenEXR if you're making big printable files. The rest of these you don't need to really worry about. Bitmap if you only need bitmap quality. But generally, most commonly, it'll be PNG and JPEG. I suggest PNG because maybe you're printing with transparencies or something. But that's up to you. Generally, I'll do anywhere from PNG or TIFF and EXR, and then do post in like Photoshop or something. You save it into a different file format in Photoshop. Compression, you know, I do generally 100% sometimes, but that makes it go slow. 0 will make it go a lot faster. Just mouse over it and it kind of will tell you. And you'll see differences in quality sometimes. It's not always, I don't always see the difference. So the rest of this. So freestyle is another rendering option that we'll explore later. We're not going to worry too much about it right now. Sampling, this is important. Sampling is how many passes at figuring out the lighting does it take, right? Like how many times does it go over one small section of your image or your what the camera sees, and does it compute the lighting? So if you have really like shiny materials, reflective materials, fire, things like that, things that emit light on their own, you're going to want to give it more passes because otherwise it's going to get what's called sparklies, which are like broken pixels, where it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know what to compute. Or yeah, we call them sparklies or sparks, sparkies, whatever. So usually in that instance, you want more pixels. There are some presets, but you'll notice like, okay, look at where my samples are set right now with render and preview at 128:32. Okay, so if I do a preview, whereas I don't actually render, I just do a preview, it's only going to do 32 samples, and then a render will be 128 per little square. If I change my presets, it's actually going to go down, which feels really weird to me. Like a final, you'd think a final would be like highest quality you could do, right? But it goes down. It actually does less. So I would leave it at the default 128:32, unless for some reason that makes your machine chug. Okay, when we do our test renders today, if somebody's takes like forever, then I'll have you drop that down. Okay, but otherwise 128:32 is good. If we have really shiny materials, like we're going to do some material exercises later, then we'll start clamping direct and indirect to kind of mitigate the sparks or sparkies. Right? Pattern, sobol, these are just different formulas for figuring things out. I don't need to really worry about that right now. Geometry and light paths you can leave at their defaults. Motion blur you can ignore. Film you can ignore unless you are doing something that you want to have a transparent background. Then under film you would click transparent and your background would be, it would ignore the background. There's sort of like a sphere when it renders, like all your stuff's inside of it. There's a little camera and draw a picture. Right. Oh, that should have erased that. So it's like when Blender renders and it tries to figure out how light works, maybe we have, here's your orange, the slice taken out, we've got like a lamp that's emitting light and our camera that is taking the picture, right? So our image is being processed through this camera and the light is hitting the orange and bouncing over here. Well, everything that's in the environment is handled as a sphere. Not a circle, but a sphere. And that sphere has a color and it has properties. Okay, you can give it like an image for background. There's lots of things you can do with it. If you don't want that to be there, like you just want everything around your final image, like my final rendered image is, this is terrible. It's my orange. Right? This is what the camera sees. If you want all this negative space to just be transparent, because you're going to composite, you're going to lay it on top of something else, or composite onto something, another image or another part of your render or whatever, then you would just toggle that little transparent setting under film, and all that negative space would be transparent. It's really useful, because then it's not rendering stuff that it doesn't need to render, right? It goes a little faster. Performance, you can ignore that. Post-processing, you can ignore that. Baking, we will get there. And SVG, you can ignore that. So lots of stuff you can ignore. The things that you should pay attention to are, for sure, render, the render drop-down, the dimensions drop-down, output, actually I can move that up, output, sampling, and possibly maybe film. But for the most part, it's just going to be render, dimensions, output, and sampling. Those four. Oh, it's because I have some plugin. I have some add-ons and stuff turned on. So if you don't have all my tabs, wait, you don't have like.
Sampling.
You don't have sampling?
I'm sampling.
You have sampling? What? Are you sure it's not like buried in there? Huh. That's weird. All right, show of hands. Who has sampling? Who has the sampling tab? Hot damn. Josh, you have it? Nobody else has sampling. All right, let's figure that out then. It's always something. Under 2.78. Missing. Maybe they turned it off by default. Oh, ha ha ha. All right, so up here at the tab, this I forgot to tell you, we're going to be using the Cycles rendering engine. So if yours says Blender Render, click on it, switch it over to Cycles Render. Then your sampling tab will show up. Sorry, it's been so long since I worked in Blender Render that I forgot this sampling is not a thing in Blender Render. I never use Blender Render. Like, just don't use it. There's no point. They need to just deprecate it and remove it from Blender. Except there's some like 60-year-old guy who uses Blender that's on the dev team who still uses it, and so he won't let him take it out. That's a joke. I have no idea. Yeah, legacy. Okay, all right. So everybody's found the sampling tab, right now? Yeah. All right. So render dimensions, output sampling. Those are the things we need to be aware of. All right. So basically, right now we have no materials. We have no materials or color information on any of our objects here. I can hold Shift and click on my layers to show or hide all the different layers. Everything is sitting right on top of each other, of course, because they're all right here in the center. So we're going to kind of move them around real quick just to get things out of the way. Okay. All right. Hold Shift and then click on your layer windows to make all the layers active. All right, so we need to add a camera first and foremost. We need a camera in the scene. All right, so Shift A, if you're in object mode, Shift A to bring up your add menu, and then camera. It's going down here at the bottom. Add a camera object to the scene. It's going to put it wherever that 3D cursor is. Couple of tricks. I like to move it along its own axis generally. So to do that, all I did was hit G to grab it, Z to constrain it to an axis. When you first hit Z when you do this, it goes to the global axis, so the overall XYZ orientation. Okay. If you hit Z again, it toggles to the local axis. So what is the Z for the camera? You know, what's the camera's north, essentially? And you can see now I can move it just by moving my mouse. I can move it up along that axis. If you'll see that the proportions of the camera are the proportions of our render here. If I change this, it makes it wider or thinner. Okay, so just remember that. So if this looks wrong, like you know you're doing like a portrait image and it looks like horizontal, then you put your dimensions in wrong or it's rotated. If it's rotated, like this arrow here tells you which direction is top for the camera. What's considered the top of the image. All right. If you want to see what the camera sees, then just hit 0 on your number pad. If you're on a laptop, hit 0 on your numbers up there at the top, and it will snap your 3D view to the camera. So everything that is not shaded, right, everything on the inside, is what your camera sees and how it sees it. So right now it just sees the box. It doesn't see anything else. If you bring out your end drawer, you can lock your view to the camera. It's under View. There's Lock Camera to View. So anything I do to move my 3D view around, the camera copies that rotation. So if I scroll out, it actually zooms the camera out. You know, it's putting the camera in a completely different position. This is how I most frequently frame objects. This is how I compose generally. I'll put it in this view. You know, turn it off, rotate, and be like, oh yeah, that looks pretty good, right? You just move it around. So now we could actually preview a render because we have the camera, we have camera and objects. These are the two basic things you need in a scene in order to render. Okay. So to preview a render, in Cycles we have live preview. Okay, it means we don't have to click a button and wait for the machine to figure it out. We can actually view it in our 3D view here and see an approximation of what it's going to look like when it's done. It depends on how fast your machine is, of course. But to preview this render, you hit Shift Z. And this is what it looks like with all the lighting and everything applied right now, because there's no lighting applied. All right, does that make sense to everybody? Just Shift Z to get a live preview. Notice it is previewing everything, even stuff outside of the bounds of the camera. That is not helpful. That's a waste of resources, right? It's previewing stuff it doesn't need to think about. So one way to get it to stop doing that is to hit Control B, and you get this bounding box. So remember B, if you hit just B, that's like getting a box to select objects, okay? If you hit Control B, what this is going to do is give us a box to just control how much is being rendered. Okay, so if I just want like a little box right here, and that's all I want to render, I just want to know what this stuff right here looks like. And Control B will do that. All right, whatever's inside the red box renders. Now if I move, oops. So that's in my camera view where it's got that, but I can move out of my camera view and also hit Control B and draw a box and render that box. It's not just for the camera view. But notice that stays in my 3D view, so I can kind of be like, oh, what's the angle that I want to view this at where it's going to look the most interesting? Right? If I snap back to camera, it's got its own box. 3D view has its own, see other different sizes, right? So there really are, camera view and 3D view are two very different things. Okay? They're in the same world, but they're two different things. All right. So notice everything is very gray. There's some semblance of shadow because there's some light in here, sort of, but not much. So one thing we can do to change that is add a lamp. I'm going to actually get rid of this box. To go back to default, you just hit Control Alt B, and that will reset everything. I generally like to draw a box around my camera dimensions so it only renders what's inside the camera, because that just makes sense to me. Excuse me. Let me get rid of this guy though. All right. So let's put a light in here. So Shift A, lamp. All lights are called lamps. Different types of lamps: sun lamp, point lamp, spots, hemis, areas. Cycles handles lamps a little differently than, well, it's not any different for you guys because you don't really know, but sun lamps are going to be your most effective way to put light into a scene, or making an object like a plane and giving this plane what's called an emission shader. So this plane will emit light, right? So if I wanted to recreate this room with the fluorescent lights turned on, right, I would actually like model the object, those lights, and then give those lights an emission shader to make them emit light. And that's how I would get kind of realistic lighting in here. That horrible, horrible lighting. Does that make sense to everybody? Most commonly though, I mean, we'll do that eventually, but most commonly we're going to just use a sun lamp. There's other ways to get more natural lighting. So right now, all the light is going down. The sun's up here, and this is the direction all the rays are going. So snap into your camera, render, and that's what it looks like. And you can move stuff. So I can come over and click on that, grab, move it around, etc. I don't have any surface to cast shadows, so there won't be any shadows unless they're hitting other objects. I just have the gray of the void, the Blender void. Does this make sense for everybody? Everybody's good? All right. To get more dynamic lighting, if you've taken a video or photo class, you know that the most dynamic lighting is in the morning and the afternoon, right? Because the sun is at a steep angle to everything, so you get some really nice shadows. So just grab your lamp, move it, hit R to rotate the direction of those rays. I like to even bring it down low. Just make sure I know where the lighting's hitting. So a little more dynamic. It's actually kind of really boring. let's move it over here. Get it that way. All right, try that. So that's a little better. All right, so now we have some interaction going on there. So you can see those. Still, everything is the gray and it's boring, but we'll fix that eventually. Okay, so you've got a lamp, you've got a camera, and objects. So there's three basic things. Three, not four, three. Three basic things in your scene to get some shadows. It'd be nice if we had a surface to emit or to catch shadows that the objects are casting. I usually just make a plane. Notice it stuck the plane kind of right there, right where the 3D, everything comes in where the 3D cursor is, okay? So I want the plane to be underneath the objects. And I'm going to scale it up. So that's how big my plane is now. My teacup, my orange are not resting on that surface. Maybe, I don't know. Trying to decide how that should look. All right, we'll just rest it like that. And then this guy. Just making sure everything's kind of sitting on that plane. All right, so now we have some shadows. It's a little bit better, right? So it's a little bit more interesting because now it feels like, well, okay, they're actually in a space. Right? We could render this and it would be fine. Right? It's not like tremendous or anything, but it would be fine. Actually, I don't even know how long this would take. A couple of seconds. So there's 4 blocks. Right? Huh? Oh, you just click the render button. Once you have that all set up, you just hit render. So yeah, this is taking forever on this machine. Let me, real quick, we're going to set it to render. Let me remote into my other machine and get the render started. Oops. Sorry, I just want you guys to see what the render looks like, and it's faster to do it this way. Okay. So I'm just going to hit render, and we'll let... Cool. Okay, so yeah, so renders can take forever. So if you know you want to render it, then by all means do it, or just make your image a lot smaller, and then you can hit render, and it will go faster. Somewhat faster. Not really any faster. Yeah, never mind. Not going fast at all. So, anyway, set aside some time to render when you're going to render. This is also a good, hopefully a good warning to not like wait until the last second to do your work. Because if you have to turn in a render for me and not just the file, count on that render taking a while, right? Don't try to like finish modeling an hour before class and then hit render and expect it to be done anytime soon. Okay? You might squeak in if it's not a complicated scene. This is a really basic plane. It's not gonna really, doesn't look that great because it obviously ends. The Earth is flat and all that, so it falls off the edge. There's different things we could do, but it's all kind of advanced modeling stuff right now, so we're not going to worry about it too much. Things you can do that are fairly simple is you can adjust different aspects of the lighting. All right. So Blender in most 3D modeling programs try to simulate the way that light really works. All right, tries to simulate the actual physics of light as much as possible. So one of the things about lighting is that other objects cast reflections. Right? This is called ambient occlusion. Right? So you're getting all the different objects in this room are technically light sources as well. We have one primary light source, right? The sun, a bunch of secondary light sources, our screens, and then some like tertiary and below light sources like our skin, our clothes, the objects around us. These all bounce and reflect light onto everything else. Okay, does that make sense? Right? This is why shadows in an atmosphere, and then the air molecules do this as well, but this is why shadows in an atmosphere are not pitch black. Right? They're never pitch black. In high humidity conditions, shadows are barely there because the light is refracting on all the air or water molecules, all the air and water molecules. Okay. In low humidity settings like the desert, that's when you would get really, really dark shadows. Does that make sense? It's like, super, super hot when you're in the sun, step into the shadow, nice and cool. That's low humidity, right? High humidity, there's barely any difference between the shade and the sun, right? Because the air holds so much heat. So that's what you got to keep in mind when we're thinking about this. So like our shadows here, they're not super pitch black, right? They're very soft, kind of gray. They're not just like stark. This is something that Cycles does by default. All right, this is why Cycles is so much better than Blender Internal. I'll show you what Blender Internal looks like. Blender Render. This is Blender Render. Look how gross that is. Not at all realistic looking, right? This is why you never use Blender Render. Cycles Render, much better. But there's something else you can do too. So over here in these tabs, we have a few options, right? This is render layer. You can ignore that for now. This is our scene. Just some information about our scene. Hey, gravity in the scene, etc. For now, you can ignore this. We don't need to do much with it. But this next one, this planet-looking icon, this is the world. So these are settings about the world. Surface, that's this background area here, right? I can change that color. It's also the color of the light, the overall lighting in the environment. Right? Your sun lamp can have different lights, different colors, I mean. But the world itself, the general lighting in the environment, also has a color. You can control that here. This use nodes, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. This is a really easy way to combine materials and colors and stuff. But the one that I really want you to pay attention to here is this ambient occlusion. Now what this is going to do, it's going to by default be at 1, which is like 100%. And it's going to really brighten up our environment. So that's like all the objects reflecting 100% of the light in the environment. It's kind of neat. It's kind of pleasing in some like sterile laboratory way, right? But generally you want to toggle that down just a little bit. Bring it down just a tiny bit to get kind of close to what natural conditions would be like. Okay. So it's good to have that on usually, especially if you're not using a skybox. You won't have pro lighting. That's just something I have. Skyboxes we'll talk about HDRI lighting later, not today. This is just lamps today. Lamps and ambient occlusion. So definitely turn on your ambient occlusion and kind of toggle it down a little. So let's see. All right, so there's our plane. It's just normal, no material. Let's grab our lamp and kind of talk about our lamp for a second. So in my outliner here, I'm just grabbing my sun. And then on the sun object, it's like most other objects, except that, like if I grab my sphere, you can see there's a bunch of different options here. There's a modifier, there's the vertex groups, this is the material, texture, particle systems. Now our sun only has a few of these things. It has constraints, but it doesn't have vertex groups or modifiers or materials. Our sun just has the sun tab. Right? Our lamp just has a lamp tab. And this controls what kind of lamp it is. Right? We made a sun lamp, but you can easily turn your sun lamp into any other lamp. So you don't have to delete it and then try to get another lamp into its same position. Just change it. How big is that? How many bounces? Does it cast a shadow? Turn that off, look, no shadows. Right? So you can make a light not cast shadows. Now the big one here is what is it doing? It's emitting. You know, what kind of a shader does it have here? I talked about emission shaders a little bit a second ago. What color is it emitting? You can change the color of the light. Notice it doesn't change the color of the come here. It doesn't change the color of the shadows. Let me scroll back, get back up there. All right, doesn't color the change of the shadows because that's under the world tab. That's this right here. If I want to change the color of the shadows, then I would do this. And change that. So really easily, I've got some fun. What would you call this? Oh, the movie just popped in my head, and I can't think of it. Anybody see the movie Nerve? Nerve, really great. Yeah, you saw it, Mary? So this is kind of the nerve lighting a little bit. Yeah. Miami, I call it the Miami lighting. I got to throw some turquoise in there. I'm thinking about my brother-in-law lives in Miami, and we haven't heard if he's evacuated yet or not. So like that's in the back of my head right now. I hope he got his dumbass out of there. He's not stupid. He's just stubborn. He's been training to be an Ayurvedic monk for the last 8 years. And the largest ashram in North America is in Miami. So he's been down there for the last 3 or 4 years. And I could just see him being like, nah, we're cool. We'll be fine. We're just going to meditate through a Category 5 hurricane. No biggie. No biggie. How he is. But anyway, so you can get some really fun lighting this way, right? By playing around. Like maybe we'll go, like make it a little darker. So between combining that, the lamp light and then the surface light, you can have it do some fun things. Now maybe that light's not enough. Well, then you just adjust your strength. Boom, right? Just crank that sucker up. And so this is what happens. Like it can't really resolve it. It's just sort of like freaking out a little bit about how light is being handled in the shadows. It's kind of getting there. So up here at the top, when you're rendering, like when you're doing a live render, it'll tell you how long it's taken so far. So this is 20 seconds, 25 seconds. How long it has left, an hour, 25 minutes, and 22 seconds to finish rendering. Now this will change, of course, how much memory it's using, and then the path tracing samples. So like how many samples has it done out of the total samples it needs to do. And that's just for the live preview. This is not like an actual preview, not an actual render. Okay. So you can see that when you start increasing the amount of light in the environment, it starts taking a lot more computational power to figure these things out. So, all right, I'm going to drop it back down to some reasonable amounts here. Okay, maybe up my ambient. I won't keep my dark dark. Up this guy a little. All right, lighten that screen up. So that's just 2 things you can do. You can do lots of other things too, like maybe I want to duplicate that lamp. We're gonna move it over here. I'm gonna swing it around. Come here. Let me just check things here. Okay. Make it a little bit higher and bring it down a little bit, and then I'm going to change the color of that one to be like a blue. Now we get something like that. So really, now what I'm doing is casting 2 shadows. I have a pink light coming this direction, and I have a blue light coming the other direction. So I'm getting some kind of weird, like purple overlaps where those lights overlap. So anything that you can do, like that light would normally mix and create, like any weird other colors it'll make when you mix a bunch of different lights together, you can do that in Blender. It just will take more computational power to figure out. So there's lots of really interesting lighting things that you can do. We haven't even started messing with materials yet. Right? It's just light. So just keep it in mind. Like here's the green from where they're mixing, like red and blue, right? If we wanted to add red, blue, and green lights in here and put them, actually let's just do it. So for instance, this is what I'm gonna do. We're gonna make a color wheel with our lights. We're gonna get a little more specific in our placement here. Let's see. Not exactly. So, all right, that's going to be our red. That's going to be our blue. That's going to be our green. And then I'm going to change my world back to a neutral color. All right, and then we'll stick. Camera's probably going to look a little weird here. Yeah. So actually, let's just look at the plane first. I'm going to move it to a different layer, and then we'll just go to that layer and look at that. Oh, we need the lights too. Where are lights? I don't know what layer our lamp is on. Here. Okay, our lamps are here. Let's move them. So that's another thing. So lamps exist on layers as well, just like other objects. Okay, if you have all the layers turned on, then the lamps will apply to all those other objects on the layers. But for the most part, that lamp only stays on that layer. Does that make sense? All right, we're gonna move them. Go down and look at that plane real quick. So this is how our plane is mixing. So it's almost getting to white. It's not quite there because I don't have the colors exact. But the color of red, green, and blue mixing all together should give you white light, right? It's close. I'm off on one of my lamps. I'm off on one of the colors. So ones go 0, 0, 0, 0. All right, so that should get us there. It's got a little color mixing in from the little warmth mixing in from this. We could turn on transparency and see what happens. There we go. Should get pretty close. It's almost white. It's a little warm. It's a little different on my screen. So if we just turn one of those lamps off now, then we just have the other two mixing. So we get kind of a purple, right? So it's red and blue. There's our red. Turn our green back on. Red and green mix. It's just play with your lights, right? You can mix them just like they're colors. So, all right. But for the most part, I just want you to be aware that there's possibilities. We're just going to keep. All right, we're not going to get rid of the. Just keep our one lamp for now. And I usually go with like kind of a warm, naturalistic color. All right. Okay. Well, that's fun. Let's turn transparency back off. So now that we're back to the boring colors again. So that's just lights. Lights are very easy to mess with. The next big thing that's fun to play with are materials. So we're just going to use basic materials in cycles. So in the rendering engine that we're using, and I know this is a lot. I know this is kind of like a lot to get thrown at you. But in this basic, in cycles, we handle material creation using nodes, the node editor. Generally, how I like to section off Blender or like organize my layout is that I'll have a render window open at the bottom and my nodes on top. So I just open two horizontal windows like this and then change the top one to be the node editor. And you can see that now I've got two boxes connected by what we call a noodle or a string. Noodle's kind of dumb, so maybe we'll call it a string. I don't know. So what this is doing is it's sending, this is for our lamp. We have our lamp object selected, or our sun object. So our sun object has an emission shader. Okay, this is called a shader. And it's connected to a lamp output. All right, so the emission port is connected to the surface port. And you just notice when I disconnect them, there's no light now in there, in the environment. If I grab and drag the emission, now there's light. Okay, that's how that works. You can adjust the color in here just like we were coming over here and doing the same thing. Notice down here it says emission, color strength. This is the same as this. Okay, you change settings over here, it's going to be reflected over here. I change them here, shows up over here. Okay? All right, this is just a more visual way of seeing and making the changes. So for our objects, so I'm going to get out of rendering mode. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply material to my shoebox and the lid. Notice when I click on them, there's nothing showing up here in my node editor because they don't have a material, right? They just have whatever default generic blah thing that Blender gives them. So you select an object and then you just come hit new. So now I have a material. We'll notice if we come and render it, no. But if I come into my solid mode, see how it's like it's white as opposed to the gray that all the other objects are? That tells you that it's got a material. All right, so here's that color. You can affect the colors. There's lots of different types of shaders, right? Diffuse is just the most common one. This is like a matte color. Okay, that's what diffuse is. The BSDF, I never remember what it stands for. BSDF shader. It is bidirectional scattering distribution function. So you can just ignore it. All right, it's just a really descriptive term of what's going on with the light. So you can play with the color here. Maybe you want your box to be kind of light blue. Now I have light blue box, right? But there are lots of different shaders. So just like in 3D mode, Shift A brings us up our add object or add menu for adding different geometry in. Shift A in the node editor gives us a menu for adding different material nodes. Okay. So there's shaders. These are all the different kinds of built-in shaders you can use. There is, am I not seeing it? Why am I not seeing it? What's it called? Sorry. Principal. I might not be updated enough. Anyway, so there's an ambient occlusion shader, diffuse, emission, glossy, hair, holdout, mix, etc., etc. For today, I'm not concerned about what you use. You can pick whatever you want. Try not to go too crazy with just the shaders. Don't play around with any of the other stuff. All right, that would be too much to bite off. All I want you to do is add some color, like set up your scenes with some light and a camera and a plane. Okay, and then add some color to your objects. So I'm gonna go through and like give my lid. Oh, so one other thing before I let you start working. You'll notice that my materials, when I made a material, it gave it a name, just like material. And then I made a second one and it gave it material.001. All right, if I click on this button next to it, this little icon, browse the materials, it'll show me all the active materials in my scene. All right, so if you want to give two objects the same material, then you just click on that and assign it that way. So now I gave the lid the same shade or the same material as the rest of the box. But that does mean that any changes you make get reflected in both objects. Okay. You can always change the name. So this could be like shoebox material. Over here, the number, the F, the plus, and the X, of course, will delete it. The plus makes a copy of it, or we'll add a new one. The F, this will save this material even if there are no objects using it. So what happens is Blender, when you save a file and quit it, Blender does some cleanup. Right? It gets rid of any materials that don't have any active users, so they're not assigned to any objects. If you want to actually save this one and not worry about losing it, then you want to click F and it will save it. This number will change here. This number shows you how many users are connected to it. If you want to make another unique copy of that shader, then you would just click that number and it makes a copy. Notice it changed the name. So here's the one I was actually editing that has 3 users, right? 2 objects and then a saved copy. So the lid, the box, and then a saved copy. Click on it again. Now I just made another unique copy, so I've got shoebox 1, 2, etc. But if I don't need those, I can just delete them. Well, I can't delete them from here, but you can delete them over here somewhere. Well, eventually. It'll clean it up. So I'm going to give shoebox. Ooh, not my plane. Ah, I messed up. Get out of this mode. Alright, shoebox. Let me give it that one. Let's make them the same. No, we'll keep them different. Shoebox 1, we'll call this lid. And I will make it a little different. So that's all I want you to do is go through and add a camera, add some light, add a plane, and start adding colors onto your objects. All right, so you have the rest of the class to work on that, and I will export this video